Marwan Bishara, though, Al Jazeera's senior political analyst. He joins us now by Skype from Paris. Marwan, is this a milestone moment that we will look back on in days to come and say, perhaps this was a turning point?
Well, certainly in terms of the ICJ and in terms of the legal status of the occupied territories, and in terms of the various details or detailed ruling that we've heard, it's a cornerstone. It's definitely a game changer, legally speaking. Not that it's surprising or shocking. It's in fact, if anything, this is basically expanding and deepening the ruling of 2004 that was mentioned today about the illegality of the Apartheid wall in the West Bank. But I think the importance of this ruling today is just how damning, how detailed it is. And it just covers all those issues that some of us, like you and I and others, for example, in the media and academia, that had to deal with. The headache, for example, of always having to read the disputed territories, when we all understood them to be occupied territories. But they said, the legal definition is not clear. Well, now no one can debate. I think that debate should be put to rest, that these are occupied territories. More importantly, it's not just the West Bank, as in the 2004 ruling. Now we're talking about one territorial unity that is occupied territory, and that is Gaza. So again, Gaza is an occupied territory. The West Bank and, very importantly, East Jerusalem, that was annexed by Israel. Hence, we are talking about the totality of the occupied Palestinian territory that are indivisible, if you will, under international law. That's also hugely important. So that means the United States' recognition of Israel's annexation or moving its capital to Jerusalem, that's illegal now. And definitely the U.S. should reconsider that, because the ruling basically told everyone that assessed or anyone that would assist in recognition of any of the de facto policies, including the annexations in the occupied territories, that they are illegal and that they would be in violation of international law.
It's a lot to unpack, Marwan. I'm trying to take them one by one. But first of all, this is coming at a time when there is a war going on in Gaza. We know that this case is not addressing, and the court made it very clear, it's not addressing the events post-October the 6th, 2023. However, do you see that it does have some implications now that the court has, as you noted as well, it has repeated and said Gaza is an occupied territory, part of the occupied Palestinian territory. So all the considerations, the calculations about whether Israel is or is not acting quote unquote, in self-defense in Gaza, or whether it's an occupying power. Do you see some implications in this finding by the International Court of Justice today?
There's absolutely certain implications on a number of levels. While the court did recognize that Israel did withdraw its illegal settlers and its military physically from the Gaza Strip, but it remained an occupying power because it could still use its authority or its coercive policies in the Gaza or on the Gaza Strip, having basically occupied the borders and the skies and the lands and so on and so forth. So in so many ways, Gaza, as I said, and as the ICJ ruled, is part and parcel of the occupied territories. And I think one of the more important elements that certainly applies is this coercive inducement of expulsion, basically, of inducing people to leave, which is another form of transfer, which, as the court recognized, is also illegal. And nowhere that we've seen the past 9 months more of this coercive inducement making Gaza unlivable, uninhabitable as Gaza. So you could definitely say that there's a number of the issues here that certainly are applicable to Gaza. But I think probably the ICJ might be saving its ruling on the what's really happening in Gaza, the genocide in Gaza, for a later date. We are all being occupied, Sami, as you know, the past 9 months with what's going on in Gaza, while the other battleground, the other genocide, the other war crimes were actually happening in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, where the real theft of land, the real annexations, the real reward, if you will, for the criminals in the Israeli government which is really the West Bank and the cosmopolitan or the metropole of East Jerusalem. And that's where most of the violations are happening, basically, in the shadow of the war crimes in Gaza. So underlining all of that today with such clarity certainly puts the Israeli government on the defensive. It basically has no defense. But it also, and that's important, puts its backers in London, Berlin, and Washington also on the defensive. Now, I'm not sure, as your previous guest would have said, that this is going to change anyone's mind in Washington, let alone Trump, if he does make it after November. But I think as Netanyahu is being now met with cheers in Washington in both houses of Congress next week, I think probably now the General Assembly of the United Nations, the world's parliament, should start taking measures. Just as Netanyahu is received in Washington, it's about time to freeze Israel, its membership at the United Nations. And the UN General Assembly is capable of doing that, just as it did to South Africa. After such a ruling, it has every possible reason, capacity, and I would say moral and legal obligation to freeze Israel's membership at the United Nations.
Marwan, putting aside maybe looking into the crystal ball of what Donald Trump may or may not do, but beyond him, in the wider circles of power in the West, do you see at all any potential for change in the political calculus that without which would leave those countries in a very awkward position of being, on the one hand, the countries that preach to Russia respect for international law and calling on it to end occupation in Ukraine, but on the other hand, continue to support what the ICJ has just called an illegal occupation of Palestinian territories and continue to send it weapons and arms even?
There's no doubt that I and countless people around the world, no less in Palestine, wish it. But I do rather want to distinguish between wishing and wishful thinking. So I think there is a lot of room for hoping that this ruling will support a movement, an international movement across the board in the West and elsewhere in the world in favor of more sanctions, more pressure on Western governments to put more pressure on Israel, in favor of embarrassing and humiliating those who continue to support Israel's illegal, unlawful occupation, annexation, settlement, those who continue to trade with the Israeli settlements, like, for example, here in the European Union, but certainly in the United States, even certain now Middle Eastern countries. I think that all will start putting pressure on a number of governments to do so. Having said that, I will also want to underline something very important. They say one of the maxims of international law is justice delayed is justice denied. We're talking about now almost 60 years, 6 decades of more of the same criminal, illegal, unlawful, discriminatory, racist occupation of Palestine. All right. And still, there are those in London and Washington still defending it or justifying Israel's policies. I think this ruling hopefully will start changing some minds and hearts and maybe switching around some of those pockets that continue to finance Israel's apartheid.
All right, that's Marwan Bishara. Always a pleasure to have you, our senior political analyst.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.